football at 4 each and every day. We got new NFL news coming out today. Sports Bash brought to you by my friends at Clark's Moving Storage. They want customers to know they're here to help during this difficult time. Clark's is following all sanitizing guidelines. Customer and employee safety is of utmost priority always, but now more than ever. Call Clark's Moving and Storage in Rio Grande for your next local long-distance or national move. Clark's provides all the packing, storage, transportation services. Call 609-889-0780 or visit them online at clarksmoving.net. All right, the NFL, they met today on a conference call at 1 o'clock and made a bunch of announcements expanding the playoffs to 14 teams, or which stations will televise those games. But I thought, John, at the top of the list is that it sounds as if the NFL, there has been whispers, Kirk Herbstreit and then others, hey, how are they going to get this season off the ground? The NFL kind of put their foot down today and said, we don't intend to lose any games, no regular season games, and, oh, by the way, we're going to have people in our building. So it doesn't seem like they're all that concerned about the next couple of months here.
Yeah, I don't know if it's that, but I do think it's a nod toward where we are on the calendar. Look, we talked about it when Kirk said that, I think a couple days ago. I mean, it's March 31st. There's no reason to panic and say there's not going to be, in his case, it was college football in late August, September at this stage of the game. And I think that's where the NFL is. Right now, they're planning for a season. And that's how I think they should go about it. I don't think there's any real necessity, and part of that is just luck of the calendar from where their season is versus obviously the NHL, the NBA, most notably, but even Major League Baseball now. They had the luxury that this thing hit at the time of the calendar to where they don't have to talk about those things yet. So I kind of applaud, and that's what I said about Kirk Herbstreit. There's no use panicking people any further. There's enough panic as a whole, and if it starts to turn into late July and early August and nothing has changed, and I think we're all hopeful it does change, then you start talking about moving the season, postponing the season, suspending the season, what have you. Mm-hmm. I don't think it does any good right now. Right. So I actually applaud the NFL for that.
Yeah, so the NFL said today that the season will begin on time and the games will be played before fans in full stadiums. He acknowledged that much will depend on public health situation, but he mentioned that the league has received that the models that the league has received suggest that we may not have to get very far down that road. So if the NFL, I'm sure, has much more information than we have from somebody, and they're probably getting something that says, hey, look, don't worry about August or September. We're going to be fine by then. And it sounds like that's the way they're kind of playing this. It sounds like the season is supposed to begin on Thursday night, September the 10th. So they have a lot of time. But as Sean Payton kind of talked about today, and we've talked about here, there is some precedent, and he thinks that the teams, much like 2011, who had their coaching staffs in place and all that jazz, have a little bit of an advantage here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've mentioned that pretty consistently as well, in 2011 being the template, which is the lockout, for a different reason. And we talked to Howie Roseman a little bit about that, and he mentioned, in some ways, there is a little bit of an advantage this time around simply because you can communicate with the players through whatever, Skype, Zoom, however you want to do it in that type of format, whereas in the lockout, you weren't allowed to communicate with the players. You weren't allowed to talk to them about schemes, have virtual meetings, any of that. So in some ways there's a slight advantage, but I don't think there's any question that teams that have existing coaching staffs that don't have a ton of change, they have a bit of advantage. I think it's going to be more difficult for players, free agents, changing systems, because they're not going to have an off season, and even more difficult for rookie players than veteran players. Rookies coming in, we talked about the Eagles wide receiver. I don't know if you can go into a season saying, I expect this rookie to hit the ground running, because they're not going to have an off season. They're going to show up hopefully in training camp and have 6 weeks, and you might be pressing even that and saying, okay, go out there and be a week one starter. I think it's going to be difficult for players changing and rookie players.
Johnny Mack's with us, Football at 4. It's official. This season will conclude with a 14-team playoff. That was voted via conference call today to expand the playoff. They will add additional wild card teams in each conference. The playoffs will now feature 4 division champions, John, in each conference, as well as 3 wild card teams in each conference, with the team with the number 1 seed will earn not only home field advantage throughout the playoffs, but also the only bye for the NFL playoffs. So big advantage for being the 1 seed.
Yeah, that's the part I like, because it does make it so much more impactful to be the number 1 overall seed. And therefore, you would think people would fight and claw for that even more. It's always important, but to have 2 teams that have that bye now or before this season, now it's only 1 team. So it's going to be that much more of an advantage. On the back end, I don't necessarily, as I said, like that 7 team. I think you're getting way too close to NHL and NBA level, where basically more than half the teams make the playoffs. I don't necessarily like that. It'll be 14 out of 32. You're not quite there yet, but I do think it makes it less impressive. I often talk about the Eagles and say you have to give Doug Peterson a lot of credit for getting this team in the postseason for 3 consecutive years. And even when you say you won a bad division last year, you still did it. It's still an accomplishment in this league. You add another team on both sides. I don't think you're going to see a ton of 8-8 teams make the playoffs. And the NFL was very, very clear to point out that if this scenario took place in 1990, which is when they expanded the playoffs from to 12 teams, only 1 team with a losing record would have made the playoffs in that essentially 2-decade span. So it's not going to mean a lot of really bad teams are in the playoffs, but there is that chance that on the off year here or there, pretty bad teams going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, so the first weekend of the playoffs will include 6 games with 6 division winners hosting 6 wild card teams. So you got the 3 champions against 3 wild card teams in the NFC and in the AFC. There will be 3 games on Saturday and 3 games on Sunday. CBS and NBC will each broadcast one of the additional games. So they were kind of the winners here, CBS and NBC, that they got these extra playoff games. But you're going to get 3 games on Saturday and Sunday. So it's a full brigade of football, January 9th and 10th of 2021.
Yeah, let's cross our fingers, and hopefully everything works out, and we do have a season, because I don't want to see I don't want to see this country if we don't have football. I think it would really, really affect people in a negative way.
Well, I mean, forget the fact that, yes, if we don't have football, but the fact that when football kicks off, if we still don't have normalcy, that's when you're really starting to get into an area of what this place is going to look like if by the time September rolls around, John, we're not thinking about playing football games.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a disaster of epic proportions. And obviously sports is way down the list. But that's why I've said I don't agree with people at this stage of the game, at this stage of the calendar. I don't agree with people even bringing that up, because I don't think that's something we talk about, optimism versus pessimism, and that's not going to get you through this. But it's a heck of a lot better to be optimistic than pessimistic, just in general, in people's everyday lives. So I don't think you force them down the pessimistic road until you have to.
Yeah.
But that's just my personal opinion.
So, I mean, obviously, you're in a situation here where money is a big factor for this, right? I mean, this is why they add the playoffs, is because they're going to get money. But are the players getting more money for these playoff games?
Well, it's always been interesting. I mean, the players are paid basically on regular season games. So you have the 17-week regular season, and that's how they're paid their salary. And you get extra money for playoff games, but the really highly paid playoffs players, they're taking a pay cut to play in the playoffs. Always has been that way, and it will continue. So that's just how the NFL sets up things. But obviously, sort of like, it's much more famous in the world of baseball. You have those postseason stakes and how much each player makes. Same thing in the NFL. But your salary and everything you hear about, your signing bonus, that's all based off the regular season.
Yeah, and this also helps the coaches, too, because extra teams mean less coaches potentially on the hot seat.
Yeah, no question. I mean, from a coaching perspective, it's nice to be able to put in your column that you coached a playoff team. So, yeah, I mean, it is going to be a little bit better from their perspective to say you can go to your owner and say we made the playoffs, and there's going to be 2 extra teams that can do that each year. Now, it's not a safeguard. There have been changes in the past from guys who've made the playoffs and guys who got fired. You saw it here. I mean, there was pretty significant change on the coaching staff for the Eagles when you consider this team made the playoffs again. And saw the offensive coordinator go. You saw the receivers coach. You saw some defensive coaches go. So
yeah, that's an interesting part of this, John, where, we always have that conversation where, well, if the Eagles make the playoffs, are they not going to make difficult decisions based on the fact that they got in? Like, are they going to have fool's gold? I guess you're going to see that conversation certainly come around a lot more with 2 more playoff teams that maybe wouldn't have got in years past getting in now.
Yeah, no question. And I think that has more to do with the GMs around the league and the personnel guys. And, you have to be honest with yourself. And there are different phases. Obviously, if you're a young team who hasn't had a ton of success and you come in at that number 7 spot, well, it's probably not fool's gold. It's probably taking a step forward. But if you're a veteran team like the Eagles were last year, couple of years off a Super Bowl win, you have some aging parts, got to be honest with yourself. And I think at least verbally, Howie Roseman has been pretty honest with himself and acknowledging the team had to get younger and go in a little bit of a different direction. Certainly not a complete rebuild, but had to add some younger bodies. And I think that depends on the individual. Are you going to be honest with yourself or not?
Yeah. By the way, we mentioned that NBC and CBS, I guess that helps swallow some of the $17 million that they paid Tony Romo, is that they get an extra couple playoff games.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not giving them to CBS and NBC out of altruism. They have to pay for those things. But especially in this world, this and even before the pandemic started, I mean, the one constant in television ratings, why the NFL has been the juggernaut it is and has become, is because they deliver, and nobody else can deliver television ratings like the National Football League. So TV stations are lining up to pay them. And I thought it was going to be interesting, and it'll still be interesting. A non-football story today, Mike, I don't know if you saw, but DAZN, DAZN, is that sort of
boxing
startup streaming service that does a lot of boxing and mixed martial arts and stuff like that, was paying major money to get into that business. They announced today, look, we're not paying you if you don't run these events. So that's sort of the first domino.
Well, which is why a lot of people Which it's interesting because that's why people have felt that Dana White has tried to get these events on, because they have a similar situation with ESPN, where if they don't air on ESPN Plus, then ESPN Plus says you ain't getting paid.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's a different landscape, and the NFL is, at the top of the heap. They'd be coming after the NFL last, but everybody else is in front, and everybody else is watching that closely. WWE is in that same category. AEW, which is a startup. We talked about the XFL a lot, and they had to cancel games, and that could destroy this whole economic situation. Could destroy a startup like that. Really difficult times economically, and like I said, we saw the first domino to that fall today.
Yeah, and by the way, just for Eagles season ticket holders out there, some quick news for you. The Eagles have postponed season ticket payments indefinitely. So there are some casualties and some effects of, while the NFL is going forward with their draft and their season and all that, they are acknowledging that, the fans aren't paying for the tickets right now. I'll give them credit for that at least.
Yeah, and they're going to push the schedule release back. League source said early May. Typically, they announce it mid-April before the draft. So they are pushing that back, the schedule itself, a little bit, a couple weeks.
You think
so they're doing a few tweaks.
Are the international games, you think, going to be affected at all?
Well, I think the same description, and it's too early to tell. They're certainly going to be on the schedule. Okay. But you do have to deal with different governments as well. And if the government says you can't have this event, you can't have that event. But I do think it's too early. Same as I said in general here, it's way too early to say they're not going to be able to play games in London or something of that nature.
John McMullen, Football at 4. Real quick, by the way, you mentioned the WWE. Did you see the ratings for WrestleMania on ESPN, the replay?
I think it was 720 this week.
839,000 average viewers. It's the highest number of viewers.
Yeah, that was last week.
Yeah, it was the highest number of viewers since the night that basketball went away on March 11th. Yeah,
and that, that's a bad number typically for WWE, just normal. They would do well over 2 million on an average Monday night, average Friday night. So, it's a different time, but, vehicles like ESPN are trying to put together programming that at least will give them a fragment of viewers. The only thing doing well right now is news stations, news programs, for obvious reasons. But those industries and those programs, they can't charge significant rights for advertising because that's not what advertisers are looking for. So it's like most industries. TV's hurting as well, and hurting pretty significantly. So, yeah, 8:30, and I think they did 7:30, 7:29 for the most recent. I think it was WrestleMania 32 they showed. Those are good right now.
Yeah, I do want to go back to real quick, too. Today, NFL's Jeff Patch was asked if the league is working through the possibility of a delayed or shortened season or games in empty stadiums. He said, quote, all of our fans have been on a normal season starting on time, played in front of our fans. Asked again on contingency plans. This is from Albert Breer, by the way. And when the NFL would need to start looking at those, basically said, quote, we're pretty confident we'll be able to start on schedule. So I just saw some stuff from Adam Schefter saying that he had the NFLPA's medical advisor on and that he has information that is suggesting the same thing, that all the measures they are taking now will help them start their league on time. I got to tell you, the NFL is as big as you can get. That makes me feel a heck of a lot better about what's coming on down the next couple of weeks, hopefully.
Yeah, and it's I've talked about it a lot. It's the calendar, and it's March 31st. And if you think about think about August 1st, which is essentially the start of the preseason.
Do you think they care
September.
if they get preseason games taken out?
No, I don't. I mean, I talked about that a lot, just from a standpoint of what it means to coaches these days, and I don't think it means that much to coaches. So I think from that standpoint, they'd say, okay, we'll get it done. We'll just practice. We'll have a couple scrimmages. So I don't think that would be a death knell to the season if they said, let's not do preseason games. But
you'd sure scare a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's why I said I do expect them to do preseason games. I just don't think it would be if the government comes back and say, okay, we can start September 1st. I think they'd be fine with that, is what I'm saying. I think if it were up to them, they're not going to cancel preseason games. If they're allowed to go on, they're going to continue.
Yeah, I just the only reason I would wonder if that was a little in jeopardy is because if by July – you're still not allowed to have, X amount of people in a setting together. That would be the only possibility I could see interrupting that potential. Like training camp can't start on time.
Yeah, well, I think it's more likely that in a training camp type situation, if you're still in that environment where, say, you can't open up training camp to fans because you can't have that kind of number of people together in a confined space. I think you have to start talking about difficult decisions at that point, because when is that going to end? So that to me is more relevant. Now, people in Philadelphia would argue the Eagles don't open up practice to fans anyway, but even the has, so to speak, and the season ticket holders and the corporate sponsors that get to go down to the NovaCare complex, if they continue to ban them in July, late July, early August, that to me, that's a big issue at that point, because how are you going to have games without people in the stands? I can't see NFL games with no people in the stands. I just can't see it.
I hope you're right on that. By the way, the NFL will release the schedule no later than May the 9th. I believe that's the date you gave. I'm just referring that as well. May the 9th, a few weeks later than normal, so we'll keep an eye on that. But thankfully, it sounds like the NFL is saying, never fear, we'll be here. And the NFL is supposed to kick off their season. It looks like September the 10th is that first Thursday night. And, of course, we'll have that game for you live on 97.3 ESPN. John, take care, pal.
All right, thanks, Mike.
You got it, bud. Be well. It's Sports Bash, and John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Good NFL talk.